I'm Newt Gingrich, and I want to welcome you to this opportunity to talk about my new book, Defeating Big Government Socialism and Saving America's Future, and also to give you a chance to get a copy, which will be autographed. And this is a book I'm very proud of and delighted to have a chance to talk to you about it. Remember, you can go to premiercollectibles.com/defeating if you'd like to order a copy yourself. So this is a very important book. It's the 41st book I've written, and I think it's the most important book I've written because it comes at a time when we're really at a crossroads as a country. There are so many things that are not working. The price of living, the price of gasoline, the price of food, the rising crime rates, the whole challenge we have with our education system, the fact that our border is essentially open and is uncontrolled. All these different things are happening. And so I felt it was very important to write a book like Defeating Big Government Socialism to lay out for people both the argument against the principles and the policies that the Biden administration is trying to implement, and also to give people the arguments about the future. Remember, this is about saving America's future, not just defeating big government socialism. I really do believe if we go back to the basics, if we remember what made America unique, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that we are, in fact, a country based on the rule of law, that we have, as Lincoln put it, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I think the people, the American people, will be able to more than save the country. They'll be able to restore the America that works. They will be able to reestablish our commitment to the core values coming from God, and they will enable us, I think, to have a dramatically better future. My job in writing Defeating Big Government Socialism was to lay out for every citizen a kind of citizen's handbook of what it will take in order to be able both to defeat those who don't understand how America works and who are causing so much pain today, and to set the basis for the reforms, the vision of the future, the positive effort that will enable us to do what has to be done for America to have a better future. So I'm delighted to have this chance, and working with Claire Christensen, we're going to be looking at questions from all of you and a chance to really talk about a whole range of ideas. So I like this kind of interactive opportunity. I'm thrilled to be working with Premier Collectibles. And I would remind you that if you want to copy the book, you can go to premiercollectibles.com/defeating, and you can get a copy of Defeating Big Government Socialism. So, Claire, would you like to start off?
Definitely. Thank you, Newt. Our first question comes from Ken from Maryland. What is the best way to keep some of the disastrous Biden-led events on the minds of voters in November and 2024?
Well, I think the best way to remind people what's going on is to campaign at gas stations and at grocery stores, because that's where people feel it in their pocketbook immediately. And it's not a political argument. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's government versus your pocketbook. And I think people understand that. It's a great question. And I would simply say, I'd say this to every candidate, spend as much time as you can at gas stations and at grocery stores, and you're going to find the American people instantly understand why we have to defeat big government socialism and why we have to get back to the basics. Remember, just 2 short years ago, we had 1.4% inflation. Just 2 short years ago, the price of gasoline was less than half what it is now. We can solve these problems. We have done it before, and we know how to do it.
Arlene from Florida would like to know, will House Republicans present an agenda to the American people of what they want to accomplish, similar to your contract with America, before the midterm elections?
Well, that's a very, very good question. And certainly one of the ideas that I outline in my new book, Defeating Big Government Socialism, is about precisely the need to have a positive agenda, to stand for it before the election, and to have the American people hold you accountable. If that's what you say you're going to do, you have an obligation to do it. I believe that I've had long conversations with Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader who will be the next Speaker of the House. I am certain that Kevin is going to have what he would call probably a commitment to America of a series of specific things. They have 7 working groups on big policy issues right now. I also have talked at length with Senator McConnell's staff, and I think there's a pretty good chance that the Senate this time, unlike 94, that the Senate is actually going to have some kind of commitment to a set of key policy agendas. So I'm optimistic. I think it's important that the American people know in advance what you will do if they give you your vote. And I think it's important that politicians then keep their word and do what they campaigned on. It's a great question.
Sean from Missouri writes, what do you see as the future of the Second Amendment?
Well, it's a great question. I would say that the Second Amendment is at the core of our political freedom. I always try to remind people, because I'm a historian by trade, and I've helped write with Bill Fortune a series of novels about the Revolutionary War. And I can tell you, the Founding Fathers didn't write the Second Amendment for deer hunting or target shooting or duck hunting. The Founding Fathers understood that at Lexington and Concord in 1775, when the British Army marched out to strip the colonists of their weapons and their ammunition, if they had not been armed, if they had not had a militia, that in fact they would have lost overnight. Done. But because they were armed, they were able to defend themselves and they were able to defeat the British. Now, today, that's important to remember. The Second Amendment is a political amendment. It's there to provide the resources to protect yourself. It's one of the key safeguards that says we are citizens. We're not subjects. Our power comes from God, and we loan it to the government. It does not come from the government. So I think the Second Amendment will survive. I think actually over the last few years, as the left has become more hysterical, even more people have gone out and bought guns, and even more people, the Supreme Court, with the 3 new Trump appointees, the Supreme Court's been very clear about returning to the original meaning of the Second Amendment and truly protecting your right to bear arms.
Kennedy from Indiana asks, why has the moral fiber of our society eroded so much, and is not properly teaching history part of the problem?
That's a great question, and I happen to agree with it. I think that we began in the 1960s going into a kind of situation ethics in which people got to make up their own rules and people got to decide what they wanted to believe in. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a great sociologist, professor at Harvard, and then a U.S. Senator from New York, wrote an essay entitled Defining Deviancy Down. And what he said was that a society has to be able to cope with reality. And so they will change words to cover what's going on. Who would have dreamed in the 1960s that you would have so many people who are homeless in a place like Los Angeles? Who would have dreamed in the 1960s that the homeless in San Francisco would provide the dual threat of walking around on human feces and having needles from drug addicts laying all over the street? These things have all become a matter of tolerating the intolerable. It's very interesting, by the way, if you study what Rudy Giuliani did as mayor of New York and what Chief Bratton, the professional who implemented the Giuliani plan, how they did it. They started by drawing very strict rules. There were a group of people called squeegee men, and the squeegee men at the traffic light would come out and they would take a dirty rag and they would wipe your window and then demand money for it. And they were getting away with it. Well, it came as a great shock when Giuliani and Bratton took over. They discovered the total number of squeegee men in the whole city was probably 200. And yet they'd become the symbol of the collapse of civilization in New York. They promptly told the squeegee men, that they were going to be arrested for trespassing the minute they touched the car, and that they would then be checked to see if they had outstanding warrants. And within about 4 days, the squeegee men had all disappeared because most of them had warrants out for their arrest. They didn't want to get in trouble with the police. They just left and apparently found something else to do with their lives. So you can either define deviancy down or you can define it up. When you define it down, the society gets steadily worse. When you define it up, the society gets steadily better. It's a great question. And let me remind you, if you'd like a copy of Defeating Big Government Socialism, you can go to premiercollectibles.com/defeating.
The next question, Newt, comes from Greg from Illinois. What are the realistic chances that Republicans retain control or increase control?
It's a great question, and I just did a newsletter, which is available at gingrich360.com. I do 3 free newsletters a week and 3 free podcasts a week at gingrich360.com for anybody who wants to go there. And I made the point today that I believe that the Republicans are going to sweep the Senate as well as the House, because when you get a tsunami, and I think what's coming is not a conservative tsunami, it's not a Republican tsunami, I think it's an American tsunami. We have a program called the American Majority Project, which you can find at americanmajorityproject.com, where we list all of our focus groups and all of our polling data. And we found, for example, that 87%, almost 9 out of 10, of all Americans believe that it's very important for us to go back and to reestablish the America that works. We found that when you ask people, do you agree with Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. that the content of your character is more important than the color of your skin? That's 91-6. So I think that there is a huge tidal wave building out there. I think it's almost certainly going to carry the House and Senate Republican. And then the challenge for Republicans is to live up to their promises, do what they commit to, and actually get something done.
Joel from Boston says, I have always believed the divisiveness in the U.S. began with Clinton. When do you think it started?
Oh, I think the divisiveness in the U.S. began with the Founding Fathers. Remember, it is a former Vice President, Aaron Burr, who shoots a former Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, leading to the modern musical. We've always had, and I think the Founding Fathers who were realists understood this, politics at one level is about power. It's about dreams, and it's about fears. And so people can be very divided about the future and what they want to accomplish and who they want to favor. And I would say, when you realize that even under George Washington, who was far and away the most popular president in American history and who people realized had won the Revolutionary War, even with George Washington, there was a tax passed which allowed the large distillers in the East to pay less of a tax per unit of corn whiskey than the distillers in the West. The small farmers in the West got furious. There was what was called the Whiskey Rebellion. Washington threatened to call out 25,000 troops and lead the army himself. And then they decided they would negotiate, and it was all over. But that's happening in George Washington's first term. So we've always had a rough and tumble process. And that's partially because if you tell 300 and some million people you're endowed by your creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, who knows where they're going to go? And so we're the most tumultuous, energetic society in the world. And it both causes us challenges in organizing ourselves, and it gives us enormous surpluses of entrepreneurial energy to invent a better future.
Tom from North Carolina writes, what can we do as Americans to get the mainstream media to return to objective journalism?
That is a tremendous question for which I have no answer. I would say that the core journalism today is really propaganda. It's the propaganda arm of the left. And you shouldn't confuse that with being a newspaper or a news magazine. I would also say that developing alternative approaches, whether it's talk radio or podcasts or a variety of steps, that is probably the most effective way to offset the bias and the prejudice of the left-wing news media.
Our next question comes from Hannah from South Carolina. How did you conduct your research before writing this book?
Well, first of all, I've been reading this material since August of 1958. So I've had a lifetime of gathering information, thinking about it, talking to smart people. Then I have a very good research team. I would say in particular, Rachel Peterson does an astonishing job. And I can send her notes and say, can you find this or can you find that? And within a few hours, there it is. So we have a great team. We have a lot of people who work together who really care passionately about America and are deeply committed patriots. But I also would say that with a book like this, you really have to take a lifetime of experience. I always tell people, they ask me, how do I prepare for speeches? And I tell them that actually it's a lifetime of preparation and then not very much at all. But it's the lifetime of preparation that makes it possible. Well, I would say this book, Defeating Big Government Socialism, may be the most important book I've ever written and may be the culmination of everything I've learned about what we need to do as a country if we're going to survive competing with China, if we're going to solve our problems here at home, and if we're going to go on to a safe, prosperous, free future. And those are the key words: safe, prosperous, and free. We want all three. And let me remind you, if you would like a copy of Defeating Big Government Socialism, you can go to premiercollectibles.com/defeating and get a copy.
Thanks, Newt. Brian from Tennessee writes in, how can Americans be so blind when it comes to the destructive path of the socialist left, and how can they be turned?
Well, I think that it's important to recognize that, first of all, just telling the truth. Nothing scares a left-wing ideologue more than being factually honest. I want to go back to what I said earlier. One of the reasons I really like having people campaign at gas stations is that is a fact. The price of gasoline has more than doubled under Biden because left-wing policies don't work. And that's a key reason why I wrote Defeating Big Government Socialism. It's not just about a performance failure. It's about the underlying failure of the policies and the belief system, which got us into the mess we're in. So I would say that the number one thing is to always try to be fact-based. And I think that's very, very important because for the person who's not quite sure who's right, you have a conservative, you have a socialist, they're debating. Well, if the conservative can point to 9.1% inflation, if they can point to $5 a gallon gasoline, if they can point to a 33% increase in the cost of eggs, all of which are real, if they can point to the most recent murders, the most recent killings, I think all of those things give us an opportunity to then be in a position where you can win the argument because the person who's watching, they know in their own life what's going on. And they know that it's not the kind of fairy tale that Joe Biden would like us to believe in.
The next question comes from Kate from North Carolina. What are your thoughts on a nuclear war happening in this lifetime?
Scares me to death. Let me just say that my dad was a career soldier. We were faced with the real threat of the Soviet Union. I lived at Fort Riley, Kansas, where that was the intelligence school. And then we lived in Orléans, France, and in Stuttgart, Germany, when literally the Seventh Army was there in order to be a tripwire to slow down the Soviets and convince them that we would fight if they had attacked West Germany. I would have to say that the great fear, there's a book called Tomorrow by Wiley. Forgive me, my throat went dry. Anyway, there's a book. I'm going to have a lozenge. There's a book called Tomorrow by Wiley, which was written about 1960. And it is the second by second impact of a nuclear weapon on a city about the size of Kansas City. It's horrifying. I mean, you cannot read that and not think that this would be the end of civilization, particularly if it happened on a mass scale. And I would say ever since then, for over 60 years, one of the greatest worries I've had is how do we follow a foreign policy and a national security policy to minimize the danger of a nuclear war? Because I think a nuclear war would change all of our lives in ways we can't imagine. I will say to you, if you want to get a taste of that, my good friend Bill Fortune wrote a remarkable book called 1 Second After, which was life in a North Carolina small town after an electromagnetic pulse attack took out all the electricity. It is a really interesting, fascinating, accurate, and very sobering reminder of how thin civilization is, how much we take it for granted, and how rapidly our lives would change if we weren't careful.
Thanks, Newt. Our next question comes from Bill in North Carolina, who writes, who do you think the Democrats will run in 2024? It seems that even the New York Times has turned against President Biden.
Sorry. Forgot to turn off my telephone.
It's a great song.
Yep, I think it's my daughter. In any event, sorry about that. The question about who the Democrats are going to nominate?
In 24, yes.
I don't know. I've decided that my favorite candidate is actually the star of Maverick, of Top Gun Maverick on the grounds that I think half of all the movie sales this summer were to go see Top Gun Maverick. As one woman said to me, a poster of Maverick or of Tom Cruise as the candidate for president would be up in an awful lot of rooms pretty rapidly. It's partly tongue in cheek, but on the other hand, we live in a country where in 2016, a real estate investor came down a long escalator, ran for president, beat 15 other Republicans, and got to be the president of the United States. We live in a country where Ronald Reagan made at least 2 movies with chimpanzees before becoming president. We live in a country where Barack Obama barely won a Senate race, promptly wrote a best-selling book, ran for president, having never achieved anything. So who knows? I mean, I think the Democrats have a huge problem. They are dominated by the blue states, particularly New York, New Jersey, Illinois, California, and therefore they are going to, I think, be real problem because, for example, Governor Newsom wants to run. Well, Governor Newsom in California presides over the largest number of homeless people. I think over half the homeless people in America are in California. I mean, is he going to campaign on human feces on every block and syringes from drug dealers in every neighborhood? You might have noticed, by the way, that Starbucks has announced they're closing 16 inner city locations, not because they're not profitable, not because people don't want to buy coffee, but because their restrooms have become such dens of drug dealing that they are physically unsafe. Now, it's almost like an Ayn Rand version of the decay of civilization when you start having a Starbucks say, we literally can't open here because it's just plain not safe enough. So, I mean, the Democrats might nominate somebody like Newsom. I personally think it's very unlikely that Biden can run for a second term. There's no evidence that he is improving. And I frankly think that Kamala Harris's laugh disqualifies her just because it's, without being inappropriate, it's weird. I mean, somebody actually put up a website that has 10 hours of her laughing, which is sort of a strange achievement. So I think they will probably have a wide open primary. I think, by the way, they probably wouldn't pick Tom Cruise. Not only is he a white male, which of course in their party right now is a big downer, but he's pro-defense, he's pro-American. He's willing to shoot down the bad guys. I mean, there are a lot of things that would disqualify him as a Democrat right now.
Turning to the Republican ticket, Annie from Tennessee asks, how will the Republicans run anyone but Trump in 2024?
Well, first of all, I think President Trump's got to decide that he has the energy and the drive, not just to run for office, but to serve for 4 years. And I think he's pretty sobered by watching Biden. He does not want to become a second version of Biden. So I think that's an example where you've got to think about, what will his decision be? Second, I don't think it's automatic that he will be the nominee. He's the front runner. He's certainly a historic figure. The things he did, if you contrast 1.4% inflation under Trump with 9.1% inflation under Biden, if you contrast the price of gasoline under Trump and more than doubled under Biden, there are a lot of, you can contrast how much Trump had actually begun to close off the border with how it's wide open now under Biden. There are a lot of grounds that would argue that Trump would be the front runner if he decides to run. But I would also say, in all fairness, Governor DeSantis is making a remarkable record. Vice President Pence is serious about potentially running. Nikki Haley is serious. There are a lot of different players out there who Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, would like to run. One of the great things about a free society is everybody gets to come and play. They're not guaranteed to win, but they are guaranteed the right to play. Let me remind you, by the way, if you'd like a copy of Defeating Big Government Socialism, you can go to premiercollectibles.com/defeating and get your copy.
Thanks, Newt. The next question comes from Sarah Grace in Virginia. Do you have any advice for someone just out of college wanting to go into politics?
It's a great question, and I do have advice. I would say first, this is an election year. Find one or more campaigns you really like and go volunteer. Be part of them. Learn. Politics is an extraordinarily complicated business. Probably the most complicated thing we do other than fighting a civil war. And I think you go and you get involved in the campaign, learn how it operates, start making a network of friends. That's part one. Part two, read every book you can find that are biographies of politicians or studies of politics. There's an immense amount you can learn from reading, whether it's American politicians like William McKinley or Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln, or it's other people like Winston Churchill, for example, or Charles de Gaulle. So I really believe politics, for somebody who's serious about it, politics is something you can study, you can learn, you can practice, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. I always tell people, if you want to avoid boredom, then politics and government will keep you from ever getting bored.
The next question comes from Maria in Montana. What are your thoughts on AOC and Ilhan Omar getting arrested during protests at the Supreme Court?
Well, I think that they should be treated like every other American citizen. And they have, this is one of the things that was brilliant about Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. He believed in civil disobedience. He also believed you went to jail because he understood that, you were breaking the law. And that in fact is an educational experience in its own right. I don't think they should be treated specially. And I think that if they're prepared to break the law, they have to be prepared to spend the time.
Our next question comes from Jeff in Arkansas. What is the biggest takeaway you want your readers to gain from Defeating Big Government Socialism?
So it's a great question. And I would say that the number one message in Defeating Big Government Socialism is that we have to win the argument about policy and values, not just win the argument about performance. It isn't enough to just say that high gasoline prices, high inflation, a disastrous border, murderers let back out on the street. produce bad results. We have to win the argument with the American people that there's a reason for these, because the core beliefs, the core ideas in big government socialism do not work. They have never worked, and they won't work even if we get a much younger, more dynamic person than Biden. They will not work. In fact, they might even collapse faster if they had a more aggressive leader trying to do it. And do let me remind you that in order to get a copy of Defeating Big Government Socialism, you can go to premiercollectibles.com/defeating, and I urge you to do that.
We've had some fantastic questions from our audience members this evening, but now we're going to do 22 rapid fire questions. The first, where were you born?
Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Tom Cruise.
What was your first job?
I've set bowling ball pins in Germany.
What chore do you hate doing?
I really dislike making the bed.
What is your biggest fear?
I don't think I have one.
Who makes you laugh the most?
Probably Calista, my wife Calista. She's pretty funny.
Mm-hmm. What is the one thing you need to have in your fridge at all times?
Milk.
What is your favorite school subject?
History.
Who is the most interesting person you met recently?
Well, I met Nelson Mandela, which was extraordinary. And I've also met Clint Eastwood, which was kind of amazing. Henry Kissinger, who's just an astonishing person.
What is your middle name?
Leroy.
What is your biggest pet peeve?
I don't know if I have one. I mean, I'm actually pretty happy.
That's good. What is your favorite hobby?
Reading.
Do you have any hidden talents?
They're hidden.
What color is your toothbrush?
Blue.
What is your favorite word?
That stopped you for a second, didn't it?
Yeah, it stopped me. Well, it asked, what is your pet's name? But I don't believe
I don't have a pet
Calista
right
have
now.
any pets.
I used to have a pet named Taffy. There was a Cocker Spaniel.
What is your favorite word?
My favorite word?
Favorite word.
Love.
What is the last album you bought or streamed?
Oh, I don't know. Probably ABBA.
Mm-hmm. What is the last gift you gave?
Oh, I don't know. I think it was, I really don't remember. No, it wasn't a ring.
No.
I'm getting coached over here by Claire.
What cause is dear to your heart?
The American Museum of Natural History.
What is your greatest achievement?
Probably being married to Calista and having Jackie and Kathy as children.
And our final question, where do you want to go that you've never been?
I want to go to Borneo and see orangutans.
And that concludes our rapid fire question. Great answers. I learned a lot.
Pretty wild, actually. So I guess we close by saying that, remember, you can go to premiercollectibles.com/defeating if you'd like to get a copy of Defeating Big Government Socialism.
Hey, this is John Acuff, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books and someone who's done a live signing. If you like the one you just watched, make sure you check out our YouTube channel. It's full of amazing authors having great conversations and signing books for viewers just like you. So make sure you subscribe, and thanks for watching today.